In today's video, we're going to be looking at gameplay for the Goblin Giant evolution coming out in a few days. I'm going to quickly talk about his ability because his stats are the exact same. He does the same amount of damage and has the same amount of health as a regular Goblin Giant. It's a one cycle evolution, which is pretty fitting considering he's a 6 elixir card, so if it was 2 cycles, you wouldn't be able to use it very often. His ability is a sack trick, so basically when he has less than 50% of his health, he spawns goblins behind him every 1.5 seconds. So let's get into some games now because that's pretty much about it as far as his stats and how the ability works. Alright, here we go, guys. Let's get into some gameplay. So we have a Goblin Giant bait deck here against Goblin Giant Sparky. Because the Evolved Goblin Giant spawns goblins, it could end up pairing very, very well inside of baity decks that have the Goblin Gang, for example, the Spear Goblins. It'll be interesting to see. I'm not too sure how good Gob Giant Sparky is going to be just because the Void is so prevalent in the meta, which is a great counter to the Sparky. And then, of course, the Evolved Zap, very solid as well, which makes it difficult oftentimes for the Sparky to break through. Now, the evolution itself, the Evolved Gob Giant, I don't know how good it's going to be. A lot of people were saying it's kind of on the weaker end, and I feel like that makes sense because a lot of these recent evolutions, they're not giving it a stat buff, they're not giving it extra health or extra damage, which I ultimately think is a good thing. But if the ability isn't enough, which we saw with the Evolved Goblin Barrel and now potentially the Evolved Gob Giant, it might be kind of on the weaker end. But with that being said, they can certainly give it a small buff if necessary. I feel like there's a lot of easy ways they could buff it. Like you see here, the Evolved Goblin Giant just goes down really easily to the Skarmy. Like, it doesn't even really matter that it's spawning goblins in some scenarios. So if they do decide to buff it, and this is assuming it's not that great, what they could do is have the goblin spawn out as soon as it starts getting attacked. So that way it doesn't happen at 50%, but maybe as soon as it starts losing health, as soon as that happens, it takes any amount of damage, it starts from there. Could be an interesting idea for a buff, but I do think they should wait and see how strong it actually is. I'm just going off of what other creators and other people have said in general, that it appears to be on the weaker end. But let's see how a couple of these matches end up going. So regular Gob Giant coming in, and it ends up getting a ton of damage. Sparky not doing very much. Like, when it just gets zapped, I mean, the Sparky just gets very little value. And the Prince, in my opinion, is still very strong, even after the nerf it ended up getting. You see it here in this Prince bait deck. It now takes half a tile longer to end up charging, but it's still getting that charge in very often. So I still think the Prince is going to be quite good even after the nerf. So just kind of an interesting thing to keep in mind, and it happens to pair very well with the Gob Giant as well. So anyone's game at this point. I think Gob Giant here in the pocket could be decent. No, Sparky comes in, so yeah, that kind of prevents that from happening. So really good Sparky. Void coming in, I don't know if they're going to protect it. Yeah, no protection. Push coming in the opposite lane for the King Tower. Prince is going to be very good defensively, and Goblin Barrel gets stopped without too much trouble. The Goblin Curse, though, I feel like is going to be broken as well, even after the nerf, just like the Prince. So maybe the meta isn't going to change a whole awful lot, although I will say the Goblin Demolisher and the Machine are certainly a lot worse. Dark Prince connects to the tower. Evolved Goblin Giant is going to potentially take it here, it looks like, and yeah, that is going to be game. So it spawning goblins doesn't seem to be too overwhelming. This might actually be kind of a decent evolution, I have to say. I wouldn't say this is the most creative evolution. I mean, I don't know. I'd even say the Evolved Goblin Barrel might be a tiny bit more creative, although it's hard to say because, I mean, this, after all, it's just spawning a goblin. I mean, that's not super complex, but at the same time, maybe that's debatably a good thing because I know a lot of casual players say stuff like they're coming back to the game. Maybe they quit for a while, they come back, and evolutions are very complicated. But I guess if they make the ability somewhat simple, easy to understand, maybe that's kind of a good thing. And maybe that's also partly why they stopped giving stat buffs to the Evos, and they're just having the ability itself. So that makes it easier too to memorize interactions and how it works. So I guess ultimately it could be decent that it's simple. I mean, because that's how a lot of people like the game, simple and easier to understand. And I think when things become more and more complicated, that might be when people lose interest. At least that's from what I've heard a lot of casuals say. I guess you guys can say how you feel about that in the comments. But either way, Gob Giant now in sort of a control deck. Gob Giant oftentimes pairs very well with the Fisherman, the Phoenix, things along those lines. I think the Goblin Giant is honestly a pretty versatile card. I think sometimes it doesn't get credit for that as much as it should. There's just a ton of different things you can play it in. A lot of people just associate it with Sparky, but recently that has just not been the case. We've seen it in a large variety of things. If you guys remember a few months ago, there were people running it with the Bowler, Fisherman, and the Gob Giant was pretty much the only win condition. You didn't have Sparky as a support card. So I bet with this evolution, we might see some new Gob Giant decks come in the meta, which will be interesting to see. I'm probably someone that's a tiny bit biased. There's a lot of people that really hate the Goblin Giant pros, and I know a lot of creators do, but I'm one of the few people I feel like, you know, kind of known in the community where I actually really love playing the Goblin Giant, so I'm pretty excited for this when it ends up, you know, being in the game, experimenting, seeing what decks it's good in. But if the evolution is kind of underwhelming, then maybe it won't be super, super OP, but I may run it anyways, because I feel like if you are running a Gob Giant deck, it seems to be good enough where it's definitely worth using the Goblin Giant evolution, especially because it's the win condition. So I feel like any evolution where it's the win condition getting evolved, generally it's going to be pretty good to use it, especially because this is a one cycle Evo. I think that's the one thing that's really going to help it maybe be decent. So you see here, Gob Giant on the tower with the curse. Kind of a disgusting combination, I'm not going to lie. It is going to get defended. Little Prince coming in here. The Little Prince after the nerf is still pretty decent, I have to say. I still think it may debatably be the best champion, which is kind of hard to believe. But anyway, Gob Giant not getting too much damage, so this is going quite well so far. Tesla gets set up, and I do believe the Tesla is very strong. It might have needed a nerf in the emergency set of balance changes. That did not happen, though, unfortunately. So I do think Tesla is going to be used a ton, especially because Tesla's a decent counter to the Goblin Giant. So I expect to see a lot of that if a lot of people are using the Evo. So push coming in the opposite lane to try to catch us off guard. Mega Knight comes in, and so far things are still going pretty well. I think Gob Giant here in the right should be pretty good because we have the Mega Knight and the Fisherman already. So it's going to just be a really massive counter push. And then we try to get a Void here on top of the Tesla and the Musketeer. Let's see. Nah, it's actually, yeah, it's not good to split it because that's generally what happens. But this, nah, Evo Tesla, oh my gosh. Yeah, the Evo Tesla is so broken. This is what I'm saying. I think the Tesla itself is fine. It's mostly the evolution, just with that pulse you get, it pretty much is impossible to break through it. It doesn't matter how big your push is. I feel like when an evolved Tesla is down, it's pretty much a guarantee it's just going to essentially annihilate everything, wipe everything out. So it's pretty much a free defense every single time. And I think that's what makes it just so strong. And it's pretty much, I don't know, especially because it's a building. I think that's part of what makes it so broken when it gets all that value on defense. But yeah, this is pretty much a wrap. So Evolved Goblin Giant, I think it's going to be kind of decent. It's hard to say for sure if it's going to be bad, if it's going to be broken. It certainly doesn't look broken, at least in my opinion. We can never predict for sure, but I would say from the looks of things, it's going to be about an average evolution. It might be below average, but either way, I'm excited to try it out because I love running the Goblin Giant. So when it's in the game, you guys can expect me to do some videos on it. If you guys enjoyed the video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe. You can also use creator code BOSS to support me in any Supercell game. If my nose looked a little different, I don't know what's going on. It's been so hot recently. We've been getting so much humidity, and I don't know, I think I might have gotten like a pimple or something on my nose, but I don't know, someone mentioned it on my last stream, so if you guys were wondering why my nose looked red or something, that's probably why. But either way, thanks again. Until next time, guys.